Hello friends, my name is Abby. Welcome to What I Knit. Today we're going to be going through my 2023 knitting stats, and we're also going to go over my 2024 knitting goals. Throughout 2023, I really kept up with tracking a bunch of different categories about my knitting projects. And to do that, I created a giant spreadsheet in Google Sheets to capture and input all of that data. And then I also set up some formulas to calculate the totals for all of these different categories. So if you want to see that spreadsheet and maybe use it for your own tracking, I will have a link for a publicly shared version. It's empty, so it doesn't have any data in it. And it also probably doesn't cover everything that you would want to track, but it at least covers what I tracked for this past year and might get you started if you want to sort of adapt it for your own uses. I can't promise that everything is like fully error-free, so if you see any errors, please let me know and I can fix it. But I did want to share it because I think it's helpful to kind of have something to start with when you are thinking about what kinds of things you want to track. And I also spent like a lot of time setting it all up and putting the formulas in, and I'm like a huge nerd about that. So that's kind of why I wanted to share it. So yeah, link will be in the description of this video, and I'll also have it in my Instagram bio for a while if you want to use it. I also want to mention that the spreadsheet has spinning and sewing as two other crafts that you can track. My spinning and sewing were both pretty negligible this past year, so I didn't end up tracking, or at least tracking to share, but I do hope to track that in 2024, so that's why that's on there. Okay, so let's get into the stats. In 2023, I finished 13 objects. The project breakdown is 4 sweaters, 4 pairs of socks, 3 hats, and 2 mitts. Here is the breakdown of how many projects I was working on per month. You'll see that there is an average of 4.4 projects per month. So analyzing this data, I brought quite a few projects from 2022 into 2023. I think I cast on maybe 2 or 3 projects and I had a total of 6 that month. Then I cast on another one in February. And then I think from February to September was kind of a time of like finishing projects and then really focusing on one project at a time. So that's why you see so many projects over the spring and summer, because I was really focused on one at a time, but I still had these like languishing projects that I was working on. And then in September, I finished a ton of projects, and then it sort of slowly increases from there into December when I cast on and finished a bunch of projects as gifts. Moving on to total yards that I knit this year was 6,985, just under 7,000 yards. The next category is projects that use stash. 53.8% of my projects used stash, and 46.2% used new yarn that I purchased for those projects. The average length per whip was 128 days, which is not too surprising to me, but it is something that I'd like to work on this year. I've noticed that if I spend more than about 3 months on a project, my momentum with it really plummets, and I just like enjoy the process less. So looking at this and seeing that my average whip took about 4 months, which that does include some bigger projects, but it also includes some really quick small projects too, so it kind of evens out, right? And just seeing that I spent a little over 4 months on average on each project, it makes sense that some of my projects became a slog after a while, and I think I would just get more enjoyment out of my projects if I had a little bit more discipline in making sure to stay focused on projects so that I can finish them. This one was also not too surprising. In the made for category, 69.3% of my projects were for me, which left 30.7% of my projects being gifts or not for me. This one came out a little bit of a surprise to me. In the patterns modified category, I modded 53.8% of my projects. And I would expect this to be a little bit higher, as I do tend to modify most patterns that I knit, But the reason behind this is that I made a lot of socks this year. And even though you could maybe technically count most socks that you knit as like modifying because you're generally tailoring them to fit a certain shoe size, I didn't really feel like that counted. So all of the socks that I knit, I left as unmodified. Okay, getting into most frequent. For the craft, of course, it was knitting. For the item type, it was a tie between sweaters and socks. The material, wool, not surprising there at all. Yarn weight was also a tie between fingering and DK. I ended up knitting a lot of fingering weight projects this year, but those DK weight socks that I knit as Christmas gifts at the end of the year really skewed my data towards DK. The most frequent color was blue, also not surprising at all. I do want to branch out this year. And my most frequently knit designer is Emily Green. I knit 2 of her patterns, which is the most amount of projects that I knit of any designer in 2023. And then lastly, I tracked all of the vendors I shopped at for yarn and knitting supplies. I also tracked my e-spinner and the fiber that I bought, as well as some sewing supplies. So this kind of encompasses all of the purchases I made for my crafting. The way that I broke this down was number of purchases. So for hand dyers, my total percentage was 39.13. My local yarn store, which I counted all local yarn stores that I went to in person. So a number of these are from my LYS, but I also visited other LYSs. So that was a total of 21.74%. For webs, my total was just under 9.1%. And the reason that the hand dyers was so high is, well, high for me, is that I went to a yarn festival last year, and I also just made it a point to shop small more frequently. I definitely love doing that more than shopping for commercial yarn. The rest of the vendors that I shopped at this past year is Brooklyn Tweed, Knit Picks, Paradise Fibers, Fiberspace, Dreaming Robots, Pom Pom, and Wawak. So those are all of my stats for 2023. It was a lot of fun to put it all together and take a look at it. I am even adding a few categories of tracking for this year, so we'll see if I keep up with that throughout the year. And an interesting thing that I found is looking at the past year's data kind of helped inform where I want to go with my crafting this year, which brings me to my 2024 crafting goals. I don't have a ton, and when I say goals, I really mean more guidelines. I don't think I've ever actually set knitting goals for a year, at least like goals that I've really wanted to keep up with. But this year it kind of just came together. I spent some time reflecting on things that I wanted to focus on and wrote down things that easily came to mind. These are kind of things that I've been thinking about for a while. And the way that I'm looking at my knitting goals is more of a roadmap to inform the projects that I choose in the future. So the first is to finish Pitch, which is a giant cabled cardigan that I started back in September. I started it, I'll talk about it in my next episode, and then I kind of put it on the back burner for a few months while I worked on other projects. But I would really like to finish that this year. So I don't have any sort of deadline other than finish it in 2024. So that's really the only pressure I'm putting on myself is I just want to finish it. I don't want it to be like a multi-year languishing project, but I don't have any lofty ideas that I'm going to finish it like this winter. So I just put this year. The next one that I have on here is start a sweater for my partner. I have knit him a few sweaters in the past, but it's been a couple years since I've made him one, and he is incredibly knit-worthy. He wears everything I make him. And again, we're not going for big lofty goals this year, so I just put start a sweater. I don't need to finish it. So I would just like to spend some time thinking about what that sweater is going to be and then get started on it. Next one is knit more sweaters than I did in 2023. Because I only knit 4 sweaters last year, I think this is fairly achievable. and I don't have a number in mind that I'm looking at. I just want to make more than 4. So we'll see if it happens, but that's just a goal because I love knitting sweaters. The next one is knit with linen. Last summer, I started a linen project that I'll probably talk about here soon-ish, but though I love linen as a material, I really struggled with working with it, and I need to figure that out before I can move forward with that project. So that's sort of the motivation behind this one. This next one is a bit more open-ended, and it is purchase from small businesses and experiment with different yarn dyers. So I don't have any sort of metrics tied to this or anything like that. I just want to continue buying from hand dyers and small businesses. And I'd also like to be a little bit more, like I said, experimental and less like risk adverse when it comes to hand-dyed yarn. The next one is knit with hand spun. I learned to spin in December of 2022 and I have yet to knit with my yarn. The idea behind this is that I will spin with a knitting project in mind and then complete that project. The last one is one that I'm not 100% sure of yet, and that is crochet a garment. I have never crocheted a garment before, even though as a kid I learned to crochet before I learned to knit, and I just think it would be fun to try it, especially with all of the really cool crochet garment patterns that are coming out. There's one in particular that I have in mind for this, but we'll see if that pans out. There are 2 other like knitting related goals that I have this year. The first is to organize my needles. This seems like such a basic thing and it's kind of embarrassing to admit, but other than my interchangeable set, which is in the case that it came in, my fixed needles are in a Ziploc bag all jumbled up together. And it is a nightmare to try to find the right needle. As I use my fixed needles more often, I just find myself getting more and more annoyed and kind of like, why have I not done this yet? So that's one of my goals. And then the other goal is to finish my craft room. I say craft room, it's also my home office. I have kind of loosely redesigned this room a couple of times and done a few things here and there over the years, but aside from my work setup, I feel like I haven't spent much time on designing this space. I don't really know what that looks like yet, but I would like to create a vision and work on getting this room to match that vision a bit closer. Especially when it comes to sewing, I don't know if I'll be able to get there this year, but my sewing machine is not necessarily set up in the best way and I don't really have a way to like cut and iron fabric right now. So that's something that I'd like to work on or to work towards. We'll see if I actually get there this year. So that's it for this video. Thanks so much for watching and I'll see you in the next one.